I was explaining the Final Fantasy series to my non-gamer significant other, talking about how each one is like a separate world, and giving her a general gist as to what happens in each. And then she asked me why the series is called Final Fantasy. I said, well, there are a lot of urban legends and rumors, but I think we've ultimately settled on that they just thought it was a cool name. And then she said, oh, I thought it was called Final Fantasy because the apocalypse is happening in each one. So it's the Final Fantasy. And I was like, holy shit. In 2002, Squaresoft released the Disney Final Fantasy action RPG crossover game Kingdom Hearts in Japan. And 9 months later, that very same year, they re-released the game there as Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, an expanded edition of the game with fresh moves to unlock, new enemies to fight, and more story to uncover. Sora's extra fighting moves here attempt to speed up the pace of the combat. Sliding Dash lets Sora zoom towards enemies, Slapshot lets him quickly strike a close foe, Ripple Drive triggers a large blast at the end of a combo if surrounded, and Hurricane Period ends an aerial combo with a fast sweep of the skies. The faster, smoother pace these moves offer, I'd say overall is a good thing, but does make the game inherently a little easier, especially once you unlock another new addition to KH, Leaf Bracer, which makes Sora invulnerable when he's healing. Even on the hardest mode here, Final Mix Proud, a lot of late game threats are significantly defanged compared to the original release with this edition. If they wanted to keep parity with the difficulty of the original release's Expert mode, they probably should have made Final Mix Proud even harder than it is. Some might say the original KH was already pretty hard, and lowering that barrier with abilities that keep you in the fight better is a fine change. The increased lineup of moves, though, emphasizes one of the combat's biggest imperfections. The reliance on moves that trigger only based on you and your enemy's distance to one another, rather than on some specific button input, is a recipe for unintended attacks. In other words, moves that can only be triggered given a specific enemy placement in that split moment are finicky buggers. Sliding Dash, for example, is activated by pressing the same attack button that executes every other basic attack just at a specific distance from an enemy. Misjudge that in the heat of the moment, or try to execute just as a foe decides to change its position, and you could end up doing a different attack instead. One far less useful than even doing your intended move and missing would have been. Same goes for plenty of other moves, where the specific move that Sora will unleash when tapping the attack button can change so quickly that even with the command menu letting you know what he's about to do, what move is listed can change literally in the time it takes you to move thumb to button. At least in the original and here in Final Mix, you can switch off the orange auto-lock so that moves like Sliding Dash and even Sora's uppercut-like moves only trigger when manually locked on. Also, most moves in the game can be toggled on and off in a menu before battle, so you can deactivate certain abilities that may be tripping you up more than helping. But you could imagine a system where every move is active and the game simply gives each one its own button or button combination to execute it, guaranteeing your move will at least play out every time you want to do it. Kingdom Hearts wants to be more streamlined than that though, and there's no doubt tying every attack to one button does help in broadening the player base, who can mash that button and have cool things come out, even if they're not paying much attention. The all-powerful enter button that can be pressed to perform any attack in the game also calls back to the traditional turn-based Final Fantasy games of old, which, as we discussed in my video on the original game, is part of Kingdom Hearts' goal of giving you the feeling that the powers of an FF character have been handed to you to play with in real time by transplanting elements like the command menu very literally into real-time combat. I've struggled to find a word that really defines this feeling. The feeling that's elicited when mechanics and game design tropes are reshaped or reused in a new context to recreate a feel from a previous game that you can't see or hear alone, that you just have to feel when interacting. The same way an old aesthetic can linger in a new palette, or similar themes can echo in different stories. This is the idea of old mechanics being presented within brand new gameplay. The word I've come up with to describe this is ludoprosody. Game mechanics being rhythmically repeated or recontextualized to elicit a specific feeling again through play, to embed a certain old feeling within a new context. You can't really put into words the feeling of playing classic Final Fantasy in real time the way Kingdom Hearts does it. FF Tensei and Kingdom Hearts control and play totally differently, but through the use of the command deck, there's still a similar ludoprosody being achieved. Still, some contexts work better for certain types of ideas than others. I suppose I can deal with moves that trigger based on position to the enemy to maintain this one enter button command triggers all ludoprosody, even if it feels like there's better places to put the challenge of real-time combat than on judging those activation distances. It is a skill you can get better at. Other new moves though, like Stun Impact, Gravity Break, and Zantetsuken, combo finishes that have a 30% chance of being triggered at the end of a combo string, are quite literally arbitrary, and I'm not as convinced they should be in a real-time action-based battle system. There's really not a great reason for all outcomes not to be possible with good execution on the player's part, when the inherent variables that emerge from having direct control of a character's movements eliminates the need for dice rolls to pick up the job of injecting unpredictability into a game like they do in turn-based systems. Or that's my view at least. Of course, we don't just have new moves, but we have new enemies and bosses to use them on. Well, new boss singular, if you've played the Western release of KH. Cutcenes, Sephiroth, and Ice Titan weren't in the original Japanese release, but were in the Western releases. Here, Japanese players get to fight them too, with a few bells and whistles not present in the Western adaptations, such as some actual rewards for defeating them beyond XP, and an extra cutscene where Cloud confronts Sephiroth. Why not? The new secret boss, present in no previous release, is quote-unquote unknown. He shows up and phases through Sora, seemingly tapping his mind for memories. He then accuses Sora of being incomplete, like Ansem, the final boss of the game, and shows a desire to test Sora's skill in battle. It's awesome. When setting out to make Kingdom Hearts, I'm sure the initial goal was to take tropes and mechanics from Final Fantasy and have a young kid running around in real time whacking monsters and Disney villains with a magic sword. I don't know if the intention was as much to create a sick dueling system where two superpowered Soul Reapers go Duel of the Fates on each other. I wonder if they stumbled on that maybe by accident, and then after the game released in Japan, they got to work on some more sick man-to-man duels that really capitalized on the tense back and forth, the deliberate countering and deflecting and combo pummeling systems at play, with Sephiroth for the Western release and then Unknown here in Final Mix. A mysterious, imposing dark figure who glides around the arena dual-wielding lightsabers with tremendous swag. There's both a confidence and grace to the way he casually walks towards you before erupting into a stunning dance of attacks. Though the erratic and hyperactive look of the performance, the non-stop darting from move to move, suggests an unhinged side to the character. The battle music here is badass, oppressive and foreboding, dark. With hidden piano notes dotted around to suggest something tragic about the figure as well. But most importantly, there's an unhinged hecticness to the track, giving you the feeling that this is a fight where if you're not constantly alert, you're gonna be dead in seconds. And it's an apt feeling to draw out of the player, because it's the truth. A uniquely epic and exciting angle is tapped into with the duels in KH and Final Mix that are especially evident in fights like the one with Sephiroth or Unknown. Sora has some pretty fly moves you can unlock, but his core combat style could be best described as determined child hitting things with stick. Even when he stands idle in combat, it's not the stance of a cocky, experienced trickster fighter, but someone visibly putting as much effort as possible into being alert and on guard, almost like he's making up for his inexperience. Sora's rudimentary battle style and determined yet rookie body language gives the combat a satisfying flavor when going up against these experienced, graceful fighters though, like Sephiroth and Unknown. It makes it look like tenacious grit, a hunger for survival, and a smart use of his relatively rudimentary and blunt-looking attacks saw Sora through to victory, and when the fights are balanced to be challenging like these, that depiction feels earned too. It's just incredibly satisfying to be fighting for your life as this kid, dodging the most intricate strings of attacks from enemies far more skilled, only to find that opening that lets you counter with what looks like basically just the primal whacks of someone determined to win and survive, no matter the skill gap. Defeat Unknown and he reveals that he is a shell, and he drops the third of 3 new Ansem reports exclusive to Final Mix. The first, received from defeating Cutcenes, lays out Ansem's plan to send Kairi from Hollow Bastion off to a world where, unbeknownst to her, she'd draw the Keyblade Master close for his purposes. While the second, obtained from defeating Sephiroth, and this third one from Unknown, detail Ansem pondering over what happens to the body someone leaves behind when the heart leaves it and turns to darkness to become a Heartless, theorizing that such a creature would neither be of light nor darkness, dubbing the resulting entity a nobody. Before entering to fight Unknown, the princesses outside will have new dialogue. They'll let you know that they sense a dangerous presence that's neither light nor darkness. And with Unknown saying he's a shell, then one can deduce Unknown is the leftover body of someone that became a Heartless, the type of being described in the reports, a nobody. Whose nobody is he, though? Well, the game leaves sparser clues on that front. The 2 major characters who become Heartless in this game are, we can kinda guess at this point, Ansem, even though I don't think it's explicitly stated, and definitely Sora, because we see it happen. Sora gets his body back, but Unknown hints at Sora being incomplete, implying that perhaps he hasn't fully. Unknown implies Ansem was incomplete too, so both Sora and Ansem could have nobody counterparts running around, and Unknown could be one of them. If you beat the original release and unlocked the secret ending before playing Final Mix, Unknown's outfit also matches the dual Keyblade wielder seen in it. This guy is also dual wielding, just not with Keyblades, which might make discerning who this guy is even more confusing, to be honest. Is he the guy from that ending and just doesn't have Keyblades yet, or a completely different character who just happens to also like dual wielding? To make life more confusing for me, Ansem Report 1 in the original is called Ansem Report 0 here, changing the number of every subsequent report. Great. All of this nobody stuff added to Cage Final Mix to sequel bait I think is done in a pretty cool way here. If anything, the multiple plausible answers just enhances the mystery. Rather than throwing out some spooky name of some future bad guy or showing a previous villain survived or something, you're given clues with ominous implications to speculate over. Getting to confront a dangerous and mysterious new character in gameplay goes a long way too. Not every Final Mix exclusive bit of story is there to tease the future though. A few extra scenes were included for added context, such as those involving Riku. One that shows that when Sora landed in Traverse Town, Riku got sucked to Hollow Bastion, where Maleficent gears up to get her hooks into him. And one near the end, where his soul is lost wandering in darkness trying to atone, when Mickey Mouse recruits him to help close the door to Kingdom Hearts and the Realm of Darkness. Both these scenes fill in some story gaps that are interesting to see filled in after already having played the original game, but I do wonder if they would have detracted from the experience if Final Mix was my first exposure to Kingdom Hearts. After they're separated, having Riku show up in this mysterious aloof state when he re-encounters Sora is interesting, and perhaps initially undercut a little by already knowing he got stranded in a spooky level with an evil witch. The surprise of him showing up to help close the door to Kingdom Hearts is also a little undercut by laying out beforehand that he's gonna go do that. Something else that is a fairly harmless switch up for a replay, but would have colored my experience of the game if I had played Final Mix first, is how most of the Heartless enemies get recolored in Final Mix. I'm ever so slightly a bigger fan of the darker, more muted look the enemies had in the original game. I don't lose any sleep over it, but an option to pick which colors you want would have been nice. I wager though most would be able to put up with any new color for enemies in exchange for one of the best quality of life improvements they could have added to Final Mix. The ability to skip any cutscenes you've already seen, rather than having to rewatch everything again if you fail. This eliminates an element of frustration present in the challenging boss fights, and now that challenge can be more enjoyed. As a novelty when replaying, the Heartless recolors are fine, but I don't think this was how the designers intended you to picture these enemies. What is cool though are the brand new enemy variants added to the mix. The final mix. These are tougher, not quite, but almost mini-boss enemies that can be hunted down throughout the game world that usually, to be defeated, ask you to overcome some kind of gimmick or little puzzle to solve, sort of expanding on these little mushroom guys from the original. Part of that roster includes the humanoid shadow creatures from the original KH's secret ending. These guys are especially sinister as they try to grab Sora and drag him down into a dark abyss. These creatures also feel like a dark portent of what might be to come later in the series, a more teenage or adult depiction of the basic shadow enemies seen throughout the game, suggesting the childhood adventure of this first game is coming to an end, and the future will be dealing with a more adult conflict. Fitting then that they appear in the very last room of the game. The inclusion of all these new enemy variants goes a long way in making the synthesizing of high-level items like Ultima Weapon less of a repetitive grind than in the original, especially with the new ability Encounter Up making enemies appear more frequently as you go about hunting down specific enemies for rare crafting ingredients. In this case, to get every special item, you'll also need to collect pickups from these new enemies. Tracking down these more unique monsters with their novel abilities is initially a lot cooler than just grinding out mostly regular foes like in the original release. The problem is the devs still couldn't resist making you grind out even these new mini-boss type guys, as you'll need to carry out the exact same fights against them multiple times too. Once or twice is fine, but the fifth time you have to return to whack away at this green mushroom guy, it's officially when the process of getting something like Ultima has once again failed to be not tedious. It's also worth pointing out that Final Mix includes a series of optional Gummy ship missions. You can go back into the little shmup stages that connect main levels, and complete tasks there that range from getting a high score, to collecting a certain amount of items on the way, to taking no damage, etc. I don't invest much time in the Gummy ship stuff, but considering how fully featured ship building and customization was in the original release, it's nothing but a good thing to add more things to actually do with your ship. These extra missions are self-contained to the Gummy ecosystem. The rewards all feed back into shipbuilding. They don't dangle any high-level upgrades for Sora or something behind the Gummy missions, which basically isolates it all to its own separate little game. Fine by me at this juncture that no attempt was made to lure me in with combat perks. Either way, I think the actual ship combat itself should probably be able to inherently capture my attention without key dangling, and with its simple, fairly slow gameplay and not very interesting look, it didn't really. For completionists, there's an expanded version of the secret final cutscene from the original, Another Story, Another Side, Deep Dive. Something to note about these cryptic secret endings is what the actual experience of watching one of these was like in 2002. Before video sharing sites or even broadband was common in the average household, this was your only way to watch something like this, by putting in the work and getting the ending yourself. Then, with no cutscene viewer, you'd get one chance to scan all the cryptic info flashing onto the screen for less than a second. To watch it again, you'd have to do the whole ending boss gauntlet over. All of this made these sort of movies more special to see and gave them a real air of mystique, like you were really uncovering some forbidden info by unlocking them. That said, because all of this stuff would flash on screen for about a second to only a few dedicated players, it was hard to expect even the people who unlocked it to discern any concrete new information from a sentence that would fly by before you could even read it. We get to see the dual Keyblade wielder fight the approaching hordes of Heartless closing in on them in the previous secret ending, before then running up the building to seemingly confront blindfold Riku. The Nobodies get referenced again, a big focus is put on the number 13, and two dark-robed wearing figures show up on a beach to converse. One says he looks just like you, and if we're assuming one of these figures is unknown from earlier, he could be referring to Sora looking like the other hooded figure here. Or Donald, Goofy, or Beast, I suppose, they were there too. Is it a coincidence that someone else just happens to look like Sora? Or a hint at something more? If you get this extended deep dive ending instead of the normal secret ending, The shot of older Kairi on the beach years later is much shorter and quicker, and is just kind of thrown into the middle of it, no longer bookending the game. In the original, I thought it was a powerful bit of imagery to end on after the bittersweet climax. A lonely Kairi asking us to guess how long Sora has been gone and if he will ever return. It is more powerful than a bunch of cryptic, albeit intriguing quotes flying around. Instead though, at the end of the extended deep dive epilogue, you do get your first glimpse at Mickey Mouse hoodied up in an edgy dark robe, which, as a taste of things to come, is about as bang on as they could have gotten. Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, I'd say, is better consumed after the original. And while the extra content being released as part of a reissue of the entire rest of the game back in 2002 was more down to the PS2 not having the infrastructure necessary for downloading additional content of that size, for a game like Kingdom Hearts, that does work fairly well. You have the option to start your game with a focus on different stats or moves, so replaying via Final Mix with a magic focus Sora or something while getting additional content on the way makes for a fun replay 9 months after release. Additionally, the way the extra content hints at what's to come through ominous clues, implying further shadows were lurking in parallel to your adventure, is well done. Despite its often light-hearted Disney levels, Kingdom Hearts nevertheless excelled at creating a world shrouded in unease and mystery, where how deep the gulf of darkness went seemed unmeasurable. Victories came, but happy endings didn't seem assured. Final Mix enhances that feeling with its proposed questions and implications, and I'd say succeeds at enticing the player with the prospect of going even deeper whenever the next follow-up arrives.